Today, I want to talk about a subject that we touched on a little bit in previous fourth hours of the show, but we didn't really go deep with an expert guest. So today, I have my friend Tim Gordon, who's coming on. I can't think of anybody better to cover this topic of religious engineering and why religious engineering and what we call institutional capture when it comes to the attempt of various power blocks, various NGOs, various think tanks, entities, very wealthy families that would like to take religious institutions and steer them and co-opt them into a certain direction. Tim Gordon is an author. He's a commentator. He is a Catholic, I would say, insider, you could say, who knows a lot about the inner workings of the Vatican. We're not just going to talk about the Vatican. We're going to get into the topics of the New World religion that they're trying to engineer and bring about, the New Age kind of feminist religion. And because they want to emasculate religion and emasculate Western civilization, they also really promote feminism. And that's why Tim is great for all three of those topics. He is the author of Rules for Retrogrades, Case for Patriarchy, and Don't Go to College. So Tim, let's start it off with the question of the corruption of the Vatican and the Catholic Church. Not to single out the Vatican, certainly this corruption is rife within the Orthodox Church, the Protestant world as well. But could you give us a breakdown of like why Vigano and these different figures that are very well known, why have they written these critiques and warned about what's going on in the papacy?
Yeah, that's a million, Jay. Thanks for having me on today. Certainly, Vigano is a holy man in the Catholic Church that's pointing out what this Vatican under Francis has undertaken since almost right off the bat in this pontificate. Really, the second summer he was Pope, a year and a half in, summer of 2014, Jeffrey Sachs, who you guys all know well, and Ban Ki-moon of the UN spent much of the summer at the Vatican helping him to write his document on like environmentalism and conservationism called Laudato Si, which lends to the population control agenda. That was summer of 2014. There's also been Vatican collusion in a similar direction with the WEF at Davos over the last 4 years. It's all population control in the name of environmentalism there at Davos, WEF. There's been thoroughgoing Vatican collusion with China, CCP China, and even the kind of, ratification of fake CCP-sponsored bishops that Catholic Church, Catholic pontiff should never cede over to an extrinsic force, particularly one so hostile to the church as the communists. So remember, even a little bit further back, there were the emails that were dumped on WikiLeaks. This is going back to a week before 2016 Trump election. And of course, it's like the third and a half year of the Francis pontificate when guys like Podesta were saying that there's going to be a Catholic Spring, heavily insinuating a kind of collusion between the Obama-Clinton axis of America and the new Vatican, which is Pope Francis. And this is all culminating this fall with a synod, my church, the Roman Catholic Church, in Rome in October, which really seems to be nothing other than preparation for Agenda 2030's realization. And that has all kinds of insinuations for your second and your third theme today, Jay, which is New World religion and feminist matriarchy taking over everything. They're all kind of the same topic.
Yeah, and for those that are maybe not familiar with the Orthodox view, we have a similar situation with what we call the Ecumenical Patriarchate, who's kind of the first amongst the bishops in the Orthodox Church in terms of honor and historical privilege. And the Ecumenical Patriarchate is also on board with all of the exact same things that Tim is talking about, with the push for inclusive capitalism, the push for environmentalism. I think Bartholomew even penned a book that was promoted by Al Gore and Bill Clinton on the UN Agenda 2030 style austerity population control agenda. Even though they might not openly say they support population control, if you're supporting, the Lynn Rothschild agenda of inclusive capitalism and the World Economic Forum Davos set, then you are supporting by extension, the population control agenda, because you can't divorce, the UN, UNESCO from that. In fact, UNESCO was set up by Julian Huxley by design when he wrote the philosophy of UNESCO for the purpose of rebranding depopulation as a kind of leftist, a cause of helping the developing nations by reducing population. And now that's been expanded beyond reducing population of the third world to the entire world, and particularly the Western world. And one of the key things they had to target was the Vatican. And I think there's a long process of this. One last thing I'll say on this before I throw back to you is, we all know about this in the Cold War with the way that the Soviets, for example, would replace bishops in Russia with KGB bishops. So you have these kind of guys that were really just KGB, kind of wearing cloaks and vestments, pretending to be bishops. And a lot of people knew that this was the case. And I think people think, oh, well, that was the Cold War, that happened back then, and we're not in the Cold War anymore. But it's not any different in the sense that you can have essentially compromised prelates across the board. And the same thing goes for the Protestant world as well. For example, the Rockefeller family famously bought and paid for multiple seminaries and universities for Protestants to attend to, ministers, specifically so that they could be trained in the social gospel, essentially a kind of liberal gospel, which removed all of the miracles. And could you tell us a little bit, for example, I know, Tim, you've talked a lot about things like Bella Dodd, and what do you think is going on with the infiltration with these kinds of examples that go back to the Cold War?
The danger for Alex's audience here is to think the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church are being infiltrated. Doesn't this mean that there's something wrong, like root and branch with the plant? No, it actually means that, look, the sacramental Episcopal Christian Church, or churches, and we can go through that at another time. These are the number one target because they've got 7 sacraments and they have bishops who stand directly in line of the apostles. That's why they're being targeted, because they don't have the vetting powers that the NSA or the ONI or the FBI or the CIA have. They don't. So in Orthodox seminaries or Catholic seminaries, they're simply just taking people on their good word. And sometime after the Shadow of Winter Palace, 1917, sometime after the French Revolution, the enemy here on Earth realized that they could infiltrate. And this is a matter of geopolitics as much as it is a matter of concern for Christians like you or me. We have, of course, several records of this. You mentioned Bella Dodd, Jay. I mean, Bella Dodd, after she was a Catholic Italian-American girl who fell away from the faith, fell in with Stalinist Russia, and was implanting evil guys in Catholic seminaries at the behest directly of Stalin. She claims after she reverted to the faith at the behest of Archbishop Fulton Sheen, she admitted to having placed 1,100 men in Catholic seminaries. And she said a handful of them are in the highest places of the Vatican right now. For some reason, to my chagrin, Archbishop Fulton Sheen didn't have her name names. But she did a tremendous amount of evil. There's another account of this by a French-Canadian nun who tended to a guy who'd been in a motorcycle accident, called the Confessions of AA 1025, or sometimes SS 1025, where he added dossiers, which more or less vindicated what Bella Dodd had said. He, in other words, is presumably one of those 1,100 plants that Bella Dodd had made into North American Catholic priesthood. And he was essentially an evil dude who is of the LGBT persuasion that would, from within, corrupt the doctrine and bend it in a feminist direction, bend it in a religiously syncretist direction. That means all religions are the same. Stuff you hear from stoners every day in bad movies, and bend it in a one world government direction. And there's not a trifurcation there. Those are 3 parts of the same attack. So this plan had gone even further back into history, into the middle 19th century, and we know it in terms of intercepted documents by the popes in the middle 1800s. One of the documents is called the Permanent Instruction of the Alta Vendita. Yeah, which is an attack by P2 Lodge, basically secret societies, highest secret society in Italy there, saying, we are going to take the next 100 years till about the middle 20th century. And even though the soldier will die, the march will carry on. We're going to corrupt Catholic doctrine, which had not been corrupted to that point, had never been touched. For 1900 years, we're going to do it from within. So whether you're talking Marxist, Mason, or some other term for it, the same stuff was going on at the late 19th century, early 20th century. And it's not just conspiracy theory, the way like goofball left cats will charge a far right-wing Catholic of holding. You have the writings of popes like Leo XIII, turn of the century popes, Leo XIII, Pius X, even one by Pius IX, on a kind of modernist infiltration of the church, which will conduce to these precise three themes that you and I are talking about today. And by the way, folks out there might not know what a papal encyclical is, Jay, but it's, as you know, a papal letter of usually warning to all of the faithful, all the bishops in the world. The most common topic, the mode of encyclical topic, of all the various topics that all the papal encyclicals have been written on in the Catholic Church, is infiltration by secret societies. So it's not
yeah,
spooky.
Exactly. Yeah, and to back Tim's point up there, what he's talking about, there's actually a single book that actually covers this. It's a great book called Popes Against the Modern Errors. And I'm citing this because it really shows what Tim's talking about isn't a conspiracy theory, but rather really the Western Episcopal teaching for a long time, until you begin to have these fissures where there's a really strong push, like he said, for a lot of Masonic ideas. P2 is a great example. Because as you guys know, here on the Fourth Hour and on my channel, we've done a lot of deep dives into the history of the P2 Lodge and their connection eventually to elements within the CIA, particularly Kissinger's, who found P2 to be a formative way to not just control the government of Italy, but to actually set up the Gladio network, which we've covered when we lectured through the Paul Williams Gladio text. He's a Catholic professor who's a little more on the left side of things, but what we found interesting when we dove into that was that his overall thesis also ties into a pro-CIA right-wing Catholic narrative that we got from John Kaler, who's kind of authoritative when it comes to the history of the Stasi. Both of those texts really point out that you have an infiltration of the religious world from these secret societies, Masonic networks, allied with certain elements of the CIA. And I don't want to be too overly broad because, you know, if you have British intelligence or the CIA in the Cold War, certainly there were a lot of right-wing elements within those structures that wanted to promote Catholicism, wanted to promote genuinely conservative ideas. But the problem is that the real, I guess, as Jay Dyer of Jay's analysis, we were just talking about religious infiltration and how intelligence agencies, governments, secret societies have attempted, at least for the last few centuries, you go back to the ancient world as well, to try to control the church, to try to control what would be preached from the various religious organizations, to steer them in the direction of what the state wants. You know, there's an old movie that I think of called Becket, and it's about the history of Thomas Becket in England. And in that movie, Peter O'Toole plays the evil king who puts his drinking buddy in as the Archbishop of Canterbury to try to control the church. And this was a big problem in the West, in the East as well. It's known as the investiture controversy. In the East, you have the history of this with various emperors trying to control and change the theology of the church. So this is nothing new. And if we get to the modern period, if you think about the British Empire, a lot of people don't know, or they may have forgotten that the British Empire controlled through basic ideas like divide and conquer. There's a great book called Secret Affairs, written by a Royal Society researcher. So this is somebody from high level in the establishment, and he's just really tracing the history of the British Empire's usage of radical Islam. And so one of the ways that people try to control is through controlled opposition, and that can include religious groups, especially if they're really radical. So the British Empire would use these radical Muslims to really divide and conquer in the Arab world so that they could control the Arab world. That was one of the jobs that, for example, Kim Philby Sr. had, or that T.E. Lawrence had, if you've seen Lawrence of Arabia. That's about that. And the American super establishment, the superstructure, they've basically inherited the same thing, and they want to control entities like the Catholic Church. This was famously known as the Doctrinal Warfare Program of C.D. Jackson, coming out of the CIA. And I've been lecturing on Mockingbird recently. Operation Mockingbird included C.D. Jackson as well as a lot of Hollywood people. So, what we were talking about there was the Cold War stuff, and really what I was trying to get to was just that power structure that was really in the background of the Cold War, that really liked a lot of elements of Fabian socialism. They didn't really like Sovietism, but they liked socialism and slow communism known as Fabian socialism. And you can see that actually with the Rockefellers, who in their authorized biography, there's a whole chapter on their funding of two different things that we're going to talk about now. The first of which is a New World religion. Rockefellers put tons of money into the World Council of Churches with the explicit goal of bending and turning Christianity to a new kind of Christianity that melds more in a syncretistic way, like Tim said, with an emerging world religion that they will control. And this is the ecumenical patriarchate. This is Francis and a lot of people in the Roman Catholic world as well, and many of the Protestant leaders too, including Jewish and Muslim leaders that I think go back to some of these older control groups as well. So, Tim, what do you think about this push for a new world religion? Is this a real thing going on with mainline religious groups?
Without a doubt, the evidence is plenary. I think you're second to none in terms of being voiced. That shows it's absolutely real. There are a lot of people online that assert the conclusion baldly. What I've always respected about you, Jay, you bring the receipts. I mean, look, if someone out there, whether they're a Protestant, Orthodox, or Catholic Christian, is still scratching their heads skeptically, consider the Abu Dhabi Statement signed in 2019 by Francis and other world religious leaders. To me, this is the ultimate source document. The main paragraph here that's now infamous, is it reads as such: the pluralism and the diversity of religions, color, sex, race, and language are willed by God in his wisdom through which he created human beings. Now, it was a sleight of hand because, of course, we're used to liberalism by now, 150, 200 years, shoving down our throats the diversity of all these other categories. And they're not nearly so offensive, irrespective of what your real view on it is. They're not nearly so dangerous as diversity of religions, particularly when you're saying that the diversity of religions, meaning true faith, the one true faith, irrespective of what you think it is, and all the false faiths are willed together by God. And there's an important distinction here. Not just willed by God in what we call his permissive will, those wicked things which he will suffer, which he will allow because of the free will of human beings, but specifically in his wise will, are willed by God in his wisdom. So this is to say in his proper will, his wise will. This cannot be. There are a couple of bishops, you mentioned Vigano in the Catholic Church. There's also our Archbishop Athanasius Schneider, who's aptly named one of the other heroes in the Catholic Church, who rushed to point out that this cannot happen. God might allow the diversity of religion, which just means error. It just means errant religion to coexist alongside true religion. He might allow it to exist in what we call his permissive will. That's a kind of equivocal name for it, but not in his wise will in terms of what providence actually designed and hopes for if human beings make the right decision. So this is proof. This is like, I mean, you could, and you do, Jay, you can cite book after book after book of good stuff, and you always bring the receipts, but this is of record, as we would say in the law. The Abu Dhabi Statement is ground zero for proving the case to skeptics.
Yeah, great example. And that's actually the basis for the multi-faith center that they built in Abu Dhabi, which is this idea that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam can have a kind of a chapel, a triad chapel of evil, as if they all believe the same thing. And even though there might be a tacit recognition that there's differences, the idea here is, well, let's ignore all of the really significant differences like Jesus, right? And let's just pretend that we kind of all have the same idea. This is a manifestation of what I would say is the same power structures plan from a long time ago. Let me give an example. The very infamous H.G. Wells, who was a high-level Freemason by his own admission, who was an atheist, at least in public perception. But he wrote a lesser-known book that I have an old copy. It's a 1917 copy of his book, God the Invisible King. And a lot of people think, well, he had to be some kind of, scientism, soy man, atheist. No, actually, if you look at what he says, if you go to page 101, he says that our God is actually Prometheus or Lucifer. And people don't know that he was actually a pre-60s counterculture New Ager. In that book and in other books, he says we're going to have a New Age religion. And his other cohort in Fabian socialism was a woman named Helena P. Blavatsky. And she was a theosophist. And what's interesting is that both of these characters, whether it's H.G. Wells or Blavatsky, they were close to a group of people known as the Milner Circles. And they were both Fabian socialists. And they both pushed the idea of a New Age religion. In fact, I'm pretty sure Blavatsky cites various Masonic authors to say that we will have to create a New Age religion to go along with the global world federalist government. So this is not a new plan. It didn't come out with a bunch of boomers in the 1960s smoking weed and saying, yeah, man, we should just have like one religion or whatever. No. This is an old socially engineered plan by the wealthiest people in the West to have a religion that they control. And like Tim said, it's explicitly there. Tim, we got about 30 seconds here. What do you think about that?
Well, I think for the folks out there who are level of religiosity, what they need to consider is why would the evil elitists who run everything really do this? Here's why. Because the drive to know supernaturally, or at least to worship supernaturally, what we call organized religion, is a natural drive. It's a natural drive, and they know that even if they push reductionist materialism, there will always be that supernatural drive, so they're going to cull it and steer it the way they want.
Don't go anywhere. This is the show we brought back with feminism. Welcome back to the show. I'm your guest host, Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis. And I want to remind you guys that look for that Sammy the Bull Gravano interview that we did with Alex. And I was honored to be a fly on the wall to listen to that wild conversation. That'll be coming out in a couple weeks. And I want to remind you guys, too, that if you go to my channel, you'll see some links to Jamie Kennedy, the comedian from Scream, from Malibu's Most Wanted. We did a live show together in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago, and Jamie had us on his podcast, and it's over on his channel, the Jamie Kennedy channel on YouTube. So it was a really wild, funny talk, and a lot of people in Hollywood are getting red pilled. So go and check that out over on Jamie Kennedy's channel. Today, my guest is, as you guys know, Tim Gordon of Rules for Retrogrades. Rules for Retrogrades. I can't say my R's today, but Tim's got awesome books over there, and we're going to transition into the next segment, which is actually ties into what we're talking about with religious manipulation and the New Age world religion and so forth. Tim's kind of one of the pioneers out there writing about the resurgence of patriarchy. And although Tim has some great books, he doesn't have a book with himself on the cover with a marshmallow gun like Kurt Russell in Escape from New York. So you can get my book over at Jay's Analysis, Essays on Theology and Philosophy, as well as my 2 Hollywood books, signed copies in the shop at Jay's Analysis. If you want to support the work I do, you can get Tim's books by going over to Rules for Retrogrades. Tim, look, I'm listening to this. I'm in the audience. I hear you guys talking about religious institutional subversion, and then I hear you talking about New World religion. What in the world does that have to do with feminism and patriarchy? How does that connect?
Everything, literally everything. Christian masculinism is the true patriarchy, the true red pill, for that matter. And it's literally even for our Protestant brethren at the family reunion, the patriarchy means Christianity. It's, Orthodox and Catholic know it's a bifurcated patriarchy. There's a clerical route, priests and bishops, and a laity, a lay route, most of us who have wives and families. But the point is this, Jay, the entire attack that these evil guys have been leveling on the churches center around what for us is the original sin, supplanting men with women. That's the original sin, Adam and Eve. Everyone out there, think about this, how fundamental feminism is to the heart of all the isms, all the evil things that have ever killed human beings on planet Earth in body and in soul. It's feminism. When Adam stood down, Eve stood up, right? And say John Chrysostom says, well, sorry, ladies, but a woman was tricked by a beast. Adam then got sort of counter-tricked by a woman, but she's close to his equal. But a woman was tricked by a beast. That's how the serpent knew to go after the woman. So this is my book, The Case for Patriarchy, where we outline that all of this collective psyoping of the West in what I call third wave gender dysphoria, transforming, that's not the real game. And neither was second wave dysphoria, which is, the L and the G and the B. The original gender dysphoria is the attack on Christian masculinism by the feminists, which took place really in the mid 1800s. 1848 is when there's something called the Seneca Falls Convention in upstate New York, where Elizabeth Cady Stanton and other Satanists like that, first wave feminists, I learned that from you and Rachel. First wave feminists got together and they outlined real feminism line by line. It's the same year that Marx and Engels did their thing, of course. But let's back it up a second. First wave feminism, second wave feminism, third wave, it's a distinction without a difference. If you look at the lines of the Seneca Falls Convention memorialized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton in this document called Declaration of Sentiments, it's just recognizable 2023 feminism. They want women in the clergy. They want women, most of all, away from children, because that's really how they take control of this, which is a huge part of the global elites you're talking about in the 1930s, 40s, 50s. They want women away from men. They want a war of sexes, and they want women in the workplace specifically, not just out of the home, but out of the home in the workplace. Then the state will run the kids, like Book 5 of the Republic says. But dig this before I finish. When you trick a group of people that women can act like men and men can act like women, that's the original sin of Adam and Eve, then it's not such a big claim to say, well, women and men can act like one another in the bedroom, which is the L and the G and the B. And conceptually then, it's not such a leap to go to the third iteration of gender dysphoria, which is, all right, if a dude puts on a dress because he can act like it, then he can identify as a woman ontologically. And guess what? Here's the real game. I convinced my friend Michael Knowles of this and Matt Walsh over at the Daily Wire. The most destructive one by 10 to the power of 3 is the original feminism, right? That's what influenced all of us root and branch. We were all raised in the matrix of the matriarchy, and it was filtered through our churches, and Vatican II verifies this, through the 20th century, through our governments. And we're not really that influenced, guys like you and I, by L or G or B or T, are we, Jay? But everyone I knew, even the half of my friends who didn't come from a divorced household, it was their mom running the household. And that's what messed everyone up. That's what allows evil to prevail in the world. And that's why it was the original sin. I'm taking a broad view. What do you say?
Yeah, I agree. And to bring it up to the 20th century in terms of power groups, power elites, there's a lot of admissions of this as well. That same authorized biography that I mentioned, The Rockefellers by Collier and Horowitz, there's a whole chapter not just on the creation of a new world religion and the ecumenist movement, but there's a separate chapter that deals with the funding of feminism, particularly third wave feminism. Abby Rockefeller gave a lot of money to that and really helped create things like Cell 16, which was this radical communist Marxist feminist groups. And of course, absolutely, those movements typically coincide and go together. Again, you can go back to Blavatsky and her sort of pseudo early feminist movements as well. And then you go ideas. You go back to like Tim said, Mary Wollstonecraft, the French Revolution, also radical egalitarian feminists. And then to bring it up to the present day in terms of some of the mouthpieces of this. One of the psychonauts, Terence McKenna himself, who worships the mushroom, why he talked to the mushroom and the mushroom told him that the religion of the future will be the goddess to return. Literally, there's a whole chapter in Food of the Gods about the goddess being the religion of the future. And we see a lot of these psychonaut guys as well, just as another example, pushing this in the counterculture, the Aquarian conspiracy, which is actually not a conspiracy text for those that don't know. It's a Tavistock created text by Marilyn Ferguson about how the world is going to change post 60s counterculture through the corporate world and the educational system adopting feminism. The book is about feminine attitudes being adopted across the social sphere, corporate world, legal world. Tim, you could probably speak to that. So would you say that this has basically taken over the institutions beyond the religious world as well?
Of course. I mean, the religious takeover was actually last, because we have more of a doctrinal starch blocking than, government. Military was one of the last ones to be infiltrated by the ladies. And sports is currently underway. But ironically, sports has given religion, I'm Christianity, what I care about. Christianity, a run for its money. Orthodox and Catholic are both being attempted to be overrun by women clerics, which is truly, truly evil. And yet it's sports of all things. Yeah, I mean, I like sports. A lot of my fans and my viewers don't. They don't like the sports ball. But I do watch it. I do care about it. And if you don't care about it, you still ought to be able to care about this. It occupies a major section, lobbying section, special interest section in Agenda 2030. Why would that be? Isn't Agenda 2030 about ecology or some nonsense? It's a major section. It's culture war. They need women in sports. I have taken a shellacking so many times during an MMA fight or sometimes during the Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder trilogy fights, where they're putting women on the undercards. Why are they pushing this so hard? Why are they pushing the WNBA so hard, even though 27 seasons, it's never been in the black? Why are they pushing it? It doesn't work. These are businessmen, right? It's really important because there's something called the female athlete triad. Women are getting so much testosterone that they stop having their periods. Women are getting so much testosterone that something like 98% of the WNBA is purportedly L. And this is important because it not only propagates the culture wars, but it does so in a particular way where the family is going to be imploded from outside pressure. Why would that be
Absolutely.
an agenda?
That's the end. Rules for Retrogrades is the channel, the site, and check out Tim's books. We'll have to have you back on, Tim.